Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
This show is brought to you by the Open to Hope Foundation in partnership with the Compassionate Friends and the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation. Well, Heidi, we have a real fabulous person and a fabulous expert on our show today.
Dr. Dale Larson is a bereaved sibling and a professor of counseling psychology at Santa Clara University, where he directs graduate studies in health psychology. He is a Fulbright Scholar, a fellow in the American Psychological Association, and author of the award-winning book, The Helper's Journey, Working with People Facing Grief, Loss, and Life-Threatening Illness. His clinical practice focuses on assisting individuals and families confronting grief and life-limiting illness. Welcome to the show, Dale.
Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to join you.
It's great to have you on today, Dale. And you actually had a brother die.
I was 5, and my brother was 11, so I was very young. But what really happened to me then, as I reflect on it, is really, I might have misspoken to me getting into the field, because my parents never mentioned his name again for 30 years. My brother's name was
Wow,
even though they went to the cemetery on their own, they didn't take me. They really tried to shield me from that. Yet my mother was depressed. I remember, seeing that. And, for years I went around the country as part of my lectures talking about help the sibs grieve, and never really conscious that that wasn't a research area of mine, that I was really talking about that. I was really talking about help this sib grieve. It wasn't until I saw the Robert Redford film, Ordinary People, and I was watching it with my wife, and I saw my brother's face appear in that scene where the two boys are on the raft, and the boy who's featured in the film is reaching out, and he can't quite hold on to his brother. I actually literally saw my brother's face appear on the screen somehow, and I thought I was on some sort of drug had been put in my coffee or something. And I went out to the car and sobbed for a half an hour, and I had never cried in the 30 years before, and I could not stop crying. And I sat with my wife in the car and just cried, and I had never cried. So, we carry our grief with us, and I really, it's a great point to make right now in the program, that we really do need to help sibs grieve. I was left alone on the porch at my grandmother's, and no one talked to me about my brother's death.
And how did Dickie die, Dale?
He fell off a rope swing and hit his head, and these kinds of things you remember so vividly. I remember him coming home, and he initially said I fell off my bike because he was forbidden to go to this rope swing by my parents. But then it came out that he was at the rope swing and fell off it, and hit his head, and went into a coma and died the next morning.
Oh, my. When you said that your parents were trying to protect you, I'll have to say one thing that I found as a parent: it's really hard to see your other kids cry. You're so devastated yourself, and it's really tough to see their sorrow, too, along with yours. So it's really, really difficult.
But as a bereaved sibling, I've got to come out and say, I hear what you're saying, Mom, and I understand that. I'm also wondering, what would it be like for little Dale? Here he is, only 5 years old. Dickie's a live one minute, the next minute he dies after being in a coma, and it's never talked about again. That must have been really confusing as a little child.
Yeah, because at 5, you don't even understand reversibility, right? You don't understand about people coming and going and all that. It's got to be really confusing.
And then there was the memorialization. There was in the home, his room was preserved for a long time. And when I went in, I really had these very kind of weird feelings walking through his room and relating to all the objects in it. And yet we never had photos displayed, which gets us to continuing bonds. How did I maintain continuing bonds with my brother when I was shielded from, discussions of him and different kinds of rituals that might have kept him alive in my heart in a more comfortable or positive way. Although I loved him, I didn't get much help in terms of maintaining a relationship with him and talking about him and my feelings about him. So my parents, I think, thought, 5 years old, it's almost like he won't even remember him, which is totally
right.
the case.
And also they could have passed down stories of you and your brother together and helped you remember those stories when he was alive.
Well, I was lecturing in Illinois, in my hometown, hometown boy, makes it good and give a big lecture for all these hospice and palliative care and grief people. And someone in the audience came up, and I mentioned, because I was going through my life history a little bit, and, Joliet, and my brother had died. Well, someone came up and had actually been on my brother's baseball team. And this is really important for us, I think, to all think about. This man, who was very spiritual, was on my brother's baseball team, which was very important for my brother. He was an all-star baseball player. Came up and told me that he had prayed for my brother for 50 years.
Oh, my
that he had
gosh.
thought about him. And his wife was standing there and said, "You're Dickie's brother. I just can't believe, because my husband has been talking about this and praying for him for 50 years. Independent validation of how a life goes on in somebody else's heart." And this was just his teammate. And he was at the funeral. And when I look back, I remember seeing all these kids in baseball uniforms. His entire team showed up. So, we live on in the hearts of others.
So talk a little bit about when you work with people, what model do you use to help them with grief and loss?
Well, models are models. I think all the literature we have on continuing bonds, disenfranchised grief, the dual process model, the task model of Bill Warden, we have all these different models that kind of describe the landscape. But everyone grieves differently. And I just find that models are only useful to the extent that they deepen my empathy. So if I can understand the person better, if the model assists me to understand them better, not to put them in some sort of a pigeonhole or say, this is going to be this way or that way, then that's helpful. And I think that there are, certain things that really do make sense. You can actually predict a lot of things. If someone has disenfranchised grief, they're going to have a lot of struggles because they haven't been able to talk about it. It's been thought to mean or described in literature as when you have grief that society doesn't really welcome disclosure concerning. So if you have a child who's committed suicide, if you have AIDS-related death, if you have other things that are stigmatized in any way, one tends to become a hidden griever because the rest of the world doesn't respond very well. Take all the veterans who come back and have had tremendous amount of grief. Well, most people don't want to hear about war stories or the fighting and loss of fellow soldiers and all that. In fact, we know that society doesn't respond well to a lot of disclosures, and this is one of the dilemmas for grieving people, which is they have the distress disclosure dilemma, which is that they seek acceptance. They want to talk about this because they have distress, but they also fear rejection because people don't always respond well. We know that PTSD disclosures of PTSD experiences tend to lead to reactions which then enhance one's PTSD symptoms. Which
is post-traumatic stress syndrome, right?
Stress disorder, yeah. You got to forgive me a little bit. I spend too much time in the ivory tower, the symptoms worsen, which is really tragic. So that's why we don't disclose a lot of our experiences. I think that's what Open to Hope is all about, is saying let's open the conversation in a safe way. We have to really open it in a safe way with trusted confidants and find people who can listen. And that's where I think counseling really comes in, because society doesn't respond well to some of these experiences.
And even when we are professional counselors, after I worked with 9/11 families for 10 years, and one of the things that we would do is when we went into the homes of people that had lost firefighters in the Trade Center, we would set some boundaries for them, too. We'd say, we are going to be in your home for 90 minutes, and we're going to be here listening to your story for 90 minutes, because what we found is if we didn't do that, people that were grieving kind of didn't know how to set their own limits, and they would go on and on and on, and then they would feel so overly exhausted that they wouldn't want to see us again. Mm-hmm. It was too much. So,
there's a way to titrate these things. Mm-hmm. You have to titrate these things for both the listener and the discloser.
Dale, tell me, I'm listening to this show. How do I know if I have post-traumatic stress syndrome? What if my child died tragically, suddenly 2 months ago, and I can't sleep, I can't eat, I'm having trouble going to work, that kind of thing. Is that normal?
Well, it is. it is pretty normal. In fact, most people who have had loss of a child are almost instantly what we call PTSD, or there's post-traumatic stress for sure. And you're going to have the hypervigilance, the kind of over-arousal. You're going to have nightmares. You're going to have things like that happening, not sleeping well. You're going to have intrusive thoughts, and you're going to have those kinds of things going on, and avoidance, which is the key thing. You find yourself avoiding various places and experiences and situations, internal and external, associated with your lost loved one. So, those are the hallmark characteristics of post-traumatic stress reaction, and they're very common.
Okay, now it's been 5 years, and I'm still having nightmares, and I've maybe even lost my job. I might have some health issues. I'm lost weight or gained weight, and I'm, I can't think about this person in my life dying without breaking down into tears and that kind of thing. Where am I now, and what do you suggest?
Well, so for that person, I do really think that it is really important to seek some counseling, because it sounds like that person you're describing is in real distress and needs to find a way to get back into the stream of life. And that's the challenge in counseling, I think. I think a support group might not even be enough. In fact, that's a case that's made even by compassionate friends sometimes, is that we need some extra help, to get people through this. And the dilemma is, what can help? And through dialogic, through encounters, an empty chair, or whatever you want to call it, really talking things through a little bit with your deceased loved one, even though, just in this imaginary dialogue that you can have in counseling. So those are some of the things that, we found over the years really can make a huge difference. People have to get back into life, and it's very hard. You're in part B. It was part A of your life, and now you're in part B, and there's a clear dividing line. And how do I negotiate this part B that was not, the plan that I had for the rest of my life? So it's tough, and I think mourning is is a lifetime kind of task. It's when people almost want to rush through it. I'm going, you have plenty of time to do this. Look at me. 30 years later, I had this profound grief experience with regard to my brother's loss.
And I just had a client come in last week that had her twin brother was murdered 20 years ago. She shelved it and never dealt with it, never talked about it or anything, because that's what her family did. And it's now really bothering her. And so she came in and started talking about it, and we started talking about her story. And then she also started thinking about continuing bonds in a new and different way, and she'd never thought about that until now. And it almost set her free. It was like this whole new awakening, like, wow, I can still be connected just in his memory, and he can still be part of my life in a different way. And that was very freeing for her to hear.
Yeah, and that's how a model can kind of help us, because it is a kind of a conceptual framework, whatever, but it does describe reality, and you saw how she was before thinking, I have to just not have this relationship with kids in order to avoid all the suffering. But there is another path through this, and it can lead to healing.
Give us 3 ways that we can continue bonds with our loved one.
I mean, I had many of my clients that brought in videos, photos. A client brought in beautiful photos just last week of her best friend who had died 3 or 4 years ago, and her husband who died about the same time, about a year before that. And she had a dream the night before where she was between the two of them at some event. And so she brought in the photos, and she put a photo of her best friend, who was her lifelong, wonderful friend. And then her husband was on the other side. And she sat in the midst of them and thought about them and talked about things they had done together. And, that really affirmed this beautiful relationship she had. So she was, sometimes would cry a little bit, but then there were tears of love, and it was a beautiful thing. So reviewing one's life together with that person, I think talking about that person like the opportunity I had to talk to that man about my brother was phenomenal. But I wish I was able to talk to my parents about him, but I didn't get a chance. And then all my other relatives are dead now, so, who would remember him, the older generation. But I think talking to others about your loved one who knew your loved one is phenomenal. And, that's another one of those dilemmas, because they think, well, the last thing I can talk to you about is your loved one who died, so I don't want to ever mention your loved one's name, which is exactly what you want to talk about. In some cultures, every year you gather before a little shrine with a photo of your loved one, and you kind of update them on what's going on in your life. This is how other cultures maintain continuing bonds. And, I like my clients to kind of think about it that way, too. Like, well, let's give him a little update here on, what's going on in your life. And for some people might think, oh, this is just, keeping the person stuck in some way. No, you're stuck when you can't freely think about and have a positive experience of your lost loved one. I think that's where you get stuck.
The things that you can do is create a memorial site for your loved one. Use a birthday or whatever, have a 30-year-old picture and say, here's, my dad, he died 30 years ago, but this is what he looked like, and I just wanted to celebrate his birthday this year. Or, just Father's Day, I wanted to celebrate him. You can put it on Facebook, and I think you'd be surprised at all the stories and things that you get from that. But, Dale, thank you for all the work, and thanks for being on our show today.
Well, thank you, and I honestly had no idea we'd be talking about Dickie and the significance he has in my life, and now I guess in this way being able to share that story with everyone. I hope it's meaningful to people. It does touch me, and I really thank you for all your work.
Thanks, everybody, for listening, and Heidi and I want to remind you that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.